Introducing Symbol, the most effective blockchain for business today. Symbol reduces friction in business, accelerating innovation and supercharging the creation, exchange and protection of all assets. Symbol is the secure, trusted value exchange platform for business, making it possible for enterprise and developers to create value together. Because together, everything is possible. Symbol, powering possibility. See how you can transform your business with Symbol at symbolplatform.com.
Hi everyone, my name is Laura Takenaka and I am the Channel and Content Manager for NEM Group Marketing. I'd like to welcome you all to our second webinar on asset tokenization. And the topic today is navigating regulation. We see this as the key to unlocking the potential of asset tokenization. And as you already know, the holy grail of any blockchain project is mainstream adoption. So we are going to today explore and showcase examples of asset tokenization and issuance of digital tokens, why that matters. Also, we're going to present challenges of and solutions to the regulatory environment. So I would like to introduce our panelists today. And today we have Iain Wilson. Hi, Iain. And Vytautas Kašėta. Hi, Vytautas.
Hi.
And we have Fong.
Hello, Laura. Nice to meet you.
And we have Youssef.
Hello, hello.
And we have Benjamin Tsai.
Hello, hi. Thank you for having me here.
Okay, great to have you all here. I'll start you off with asset tokenization. It's a very exciting opportunity to level the playing field for all, most of us anyway, to participate. But for it to achieve its potential, it needs to be wired into an agreed regulatory framework to ensure transparency and confidence required for mainstream adoption. And all of us here definitely want mainstream adoption for blockchain projects. Could each of you please give an example of asset tokenization for those of us, well, not just me, but others out there who may not completely understand what the term means?
Yeah, I mean, like for me, tokenization is tokenization of value. So it's quite a broad idea. I pretty much think the future will be tokenizing quite novel things and things probably people haven't thought about. Probably at this stage, it really comes down to quite basic. It's talking about real assets, whether it's a security or a bond. In the future, I think it will evolve quite a lot where you'll actually get periods where people will look at, say, loyalty programs, so it will widen the definition of what we think is a capital instrument.
Yeah, as a technical guy, I would suggest the two major approaches to how tokenization is being done to understand the use cases. Basically, the first approach is trying to bring everyday assets into digital world by leveraging by using this digital twins concept, where we try to represent all the life cycle of a tangible asset, tangible good in the digital form, where the other approach would be creating digital originals already on the in digital form, whether it's centralized or decentralized or hybrid infrastructure. So basically, towards we are moving towards this digital originals, where digital shares could represent the shares itself, but not these real world tangible shares, but rather the new type, the digital originals as a shares or other assets. Basically, the intellectual property also could be really an asset, digital asset in the digital original form.
To me, to put it simple, I mean, asset tokenization is the new wave of financial innovation. And it is actually about moving assets to the blockchain. So an example is in terms of security tokens, which is the industry I'm in. Tokenizing assets utilize digital tokens to prove ownership of real assets. So this will enable a number of benefits while expediting the process of buying and selling securities. So by backing the value of a token with a real world asset, it opens up the potential investor base of that token to a much, much wider market and on a 24/7 basis, and then thereby increases liquidity compared to traditional securities.
Yeah, so really asset tokenization to me is similar to kind of what Iain said, which is you're taking something that already has value and you're digitizing it on the blockchain. So you're creating a digital representation or like a double of it that can easily be bought and sold, very easily by really anyone at this point because of the availability of the ledger at all times.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think the conversation started from a very technical perspective, and then it flowed into finance as the panelists are moving along, very well organized. I'll end that by saying, I think I'm happy to give out some examples. We as a blockchain and cryptocurrency company decided we want to get into hard asset tokenization. So I actually spent a lot of time looking at the different assets I can bring onto the blockchain. And this is more of an exercise on the finance side rather than the technology side, knowing that the technology is available. For us, we've looked at quite a number of different things. I'm personally a real estate investor, so we've looked at real estate. We've looked at clean water. We looked at carbon credit. I had, availability of carbon credit out of Indonesian rainforest. I had a Japanese corporate client that wanted to tokenize Japanese racehorses, actually. So that was kind of interesting. And we looked at various different other assets. Picassos, an acquaintance had Picassos, so in kind of the collectible space. And we ended up with whiskey because we really like the return profile on that. And that isn't really a technology discussion, but more of the hard asset side of that discussion. So we're also seeing other people come up with creative ways of packaging digital assets. There's a boom in kind of the NFT space. And also, very recently I found innovative was, one of the NBA players put his contract actually on a security token, kind of tokenize that. So happy to get into more details at some point.
Sure. So for everyone, would you classify assets then for people who this might have gone over their head just a tiny bit, basically assets of anything that you assign value to and you could then tokenize it? Would that be a fair, succinct definition?
Yes, definitely. That includes shares in a company, anything that represents a security that could represent a painting, a piece of real estate, really anything that has value already can be tokenized. And as previously mentioned, it can be opened up to a much wider range of people that way.
Okay. And it kind of flows into our next question about how asset tokenization levels the playing field to everyone. And could you give examples? And Ben, you mentioned something about racehorses and tokenizing racehorses. Would that be fractional ownership? And then I guess, would you say that lowers the barrier of entry to people who may not be familiar with the space?
So there are a number of benefits through tokenization. One major one is fractionalization, and fractionalization is trying to bring kind of smaller investors into larger investments that they wouldn't do themselves. Probably a good example would be, my Picasso example. Our co-founder, our CEO, my business partner, David, knows someone who owns $600 million worth of Picassos. Now, I don't know a lot of people who can buy a single Picasso in terms of how expensive they are, but they are a good investment asset. And by fractionalizing it, people are able to, take advantage of that ownership and enjoy the benefit of the added value. With the racehorse one, it's actually very interesting. It leads back to the regulations. By Japanese rules, for Japanese racehorses that are raced in Japan, you have to either be a Japanese individual or a Japanese corporate to buy that. Foreign investors are not allowed direct access to it. So the idea of tokenization, which, to be very clear, full disclaimer, we didn't go down that project, for financial reasons. It was designed so that, a lot of the other Asian markets, a lot of Asian investors who are interested in putting more money into that asset were going to be able to be given access to it. So it was more of a regulatory access rather than a fractionalization discussion.
Does anyone else want to chime in on that?
I would add to this. We're talking about the assets that we know everybody already. The financial assets, basically shares or other things, but there are those virtual assets that are really sometimes expensive and really needed assets, like in-game item tokenization, where we can identify them, account them, make the full life cycle of the in-game items, or let's say virtual worlds. There are a lot of examples like Decentraland or other things where we sort of create this digital land where you can live your second life, basically. And the other very prominent field is intellectual property, where we can tokenize and issue a token based on this piece of intellectual property, and make account it, basically. We can buy, rent, or sort of do management.
Yeah, I just think there's an element of, fractionalization is interesting because you look at it from a portfolio diversification point of view. So if you take something like we saw some fractionalization in commercial property, for instance. Commercial property is private investors is quite hard to get hold of commercial property, and it's very lumpy. It's trading in say millions of dollars. But if you wanted to build up a portfolio and have some exposure to commercial property, which in your pension, for example, it's a nice way. Actually, the divisibility, you can build up a portfolio of a small amount of each individual building, for example, and then you don't take the risk of one single building or one single tenant and the covenant associated with that commercial property value. So there's an access element where an investor can get access to new streams of investments, but there's also a risk diversification, which I think is quite strong. And again, at some point people think some of these new assets might be a bit strange, but actually, for example, like royalties, just streams of income, and they're actually quite bond-like. So there's an element with bonds where you have credit risk, but you also can from an institutional point of view, it's very easy to get that exposure. From an individual's point of view, it's actually quite hard. So there's you give people a bigger opportunity set, subject to the regulation, in the sense of, are you allowed to market that product to the individual? So I think it's quite powerful from an individual's point of view.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Ben has mentioned just now. In my opinion, asset tokenization levels the playing field for everyone by allowing almost anyone to be an early investor. So we will be able to ride a company's success from day one, where previously the opportunity has always been saved for venture funds and their wealthy investors' clients.
Okay, Bader, did you want to say anything on this?
Yeah, so everyone's mentioning kind of the investor point of view, but actually from the other side, asset tokenization really lets anyone tokenize, so that the same concepts that go into tokenizing an enterprise, someone as huge as Amazon, for example, tokenizing their shares, a supermarket could use it to tokenize their loyalty points or something like that, which is actually very, very powerful in that regard, because it really levels the playing field for not just the investor, but also for anyone who wants to tokenize anything and take advantage of the pros of it.
Okay, thank you. We're switching gears just a little bit, but not too much, and talking about CBDCs. And as you know, they're multiplying apace. Vytautas, Bank of Lithuania, and China's digital yuan. So where do you think is next? Who's going to be the next mover? And what are the benefits for them to be the next mover?
I would see the very good question about the banks experimenting with the CBDCs, or those quasi CBDCs like Bank of Lithuania for now. But the next would be, I would see the two use cases. One is basically this cashless society. It's Scandinavia, basically, that the people already are living there with really the small amounts of cash, and then the next step is 100% cashless. So the pure CBDC, that's for them, because as we already know, the only the central bank money currently accessible to general public is cash, is physical cash. So this digital cash, CBDC, would make the next step. And the other side of the vault that I see will be next with moving with CBDCs. It's like Central America probably, where there are several countries that would be willing to have some common means of exchange, basically, like in the whole region.
Okay, thank you, Iain Wilson.
Yeah, look, I actually think if you really go into them, on the one level, it's about digitalization, but the implications for a smaller country and a bigger country, or a country that's got a big financial sector, banking system, is completely different. And then there's a whole transmission mechanism where conventional monetary policy is working through a banking system. If you directly allow people to have accounts, individuals and corporates having accounts with the central bank, it really alters how you conduct your monetary policy. So the way I see it is it's going to be the smaller countries that want to be innovative in digitalization, that haven't got big banking sectors. Their choice is completely different from a bigger country, and I can sort of see why the bigger countries with big banking systems are being very, very careful. They've been evaluating this for a number of years, but actually to get them to go towards a digital currency is going to be a very big, it's a very big deal. So yeah.
Well, as for me, it's, I don't know whether you guys have been following the news. I think in 2 weeks ago, according to the Global Standards Mapping Initiative that was launched by the Global Blockchain Business Council and the World Economic Forum, the growth of the CBD across the world are divided accordingly into 3 different phases. I mean, firstly, the research phase, and then the development phase, and finally the pilot phase. So, and from its pilot phase list, I mean, according to this mapping initiative, it looks like besides China and Marshall Islands being in the pole positions, I think Uruguay, Bahamas, Thailand, South Korea, Sweden, and Ukraine will be the next few ready to implement their CBDC projects in the near future. So as for the benefits of CBDC, I mean, there are definitely plenty that I can talk about, but I personally feel that one of the most important is with CBDC, it allows the tokenized financial ecosystem to flourish as the emergence of tokens such as your tokenized bonds, your equity, or even your fractionalized piece of real estate will allow central banks to provide settlement and faster payment solutions through CBDC within a tokenized financial market infrastructure.
Okay, Ben, I'm going to get to you in just a second, but Bader, you mentioned barrier to entry, and this might get a little bit controversial here. Whereas if everyone's moving to CBDCs, and as you see right now in some countries, you can't use cash. Don't you think in some ways that actually creates a barrier to entry for people who do not have access to either A, the technology, or B, the know-how and skills to then access the CBDCs? And do you think that is a job of either the technology company, blockchain company, or is it of the government? And I know that's a bit off topic, but I actually see this as a kind of a really big sticking point. And actually, Ben, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think you brought up a very big and deep question, and I think there are 2 sides to this. One side is, a lot of the probably more developing countries don't originally have a finance infrastructure. By kind of leapfrogging the traditional stuff and going directly to the new age stuff, it actually could be good. It's somewhat similar to, for example, Indonesia never put a landline phone system down very well because they're very island based, but because of that, their cell system is much more developed. They basically just jump to the next technology. So in theory, there are positives to moving to kind of a digital system, but you're bringing up a good question, which I think is a tough one. It's a more of a social question with regards to what about the accessibility of people who don't have it. I think there are 2 halves to that, and obviously, I think the jury's still out on what the official solution is. But From the technology side, I think all of us who are working on the technology, which I'm kind of in, kind of not in, I'm really probably more finance and tech, is about the ease of use, ease of access, UX, simple systems. I've seen people work on digital wallets that are not on phones, but more simply a card, with cards that are able to transfer value to other cards without a full infrastructure, kind of direct transfer, as opposed to needing to connect to a Wi-Fi, connect to the internet, dump all the information to the internet, and then transfer back down through that whole chain to another card, even though both cards are in the same room, right? So I think we've all been very reliant on a global network of data where, that may not be available at the speed we need, for everybody else. So, on the technology side, I certainly think there's room for improvement on UX, on access, on ease of use, on cheapness of use. Some of these solutions, bringing the cost down itself is a very important point. The flip side of that is I think the government needs to be able to make these solutions available widely and have it be accessible. I think, governments are generally, hesitant to adopt new technology. And I understand, because the tech people all want to go everywhere in every single direction. If the government just says yes to everything, it'll just be all over the place. There does need to be kind of the adults in the room that are saying, okay, this is the general direction we want to go, and so forth. And I think that is an important point that needs to be driven. They need to kind of keep access open so that, businesses aren't focused on just servicing, people who are paying more for luxury items as opposed to kind of basic services and so forth. So this goes back to a fundamental debate in the US of whether internet access is a utility that the government should come in and make sure everybody gets. It's the same type of question, but at a different scale. Is the financial system something of a basic utility people should have? And I would think so. Yeah.
Does anyone else want to tackle that one?
I mean, I think Ben touched the right point there. It's a social question. But I think what's interesting, one of what I was alluding to earlier on in terms of your existing financial system. So I'll take UK as an example, because obviously I know quite a lot about the UK, but it's got a very old financial system. It's got a lot of legacy tech and systems built over the top of each other. So, for example, the banks want to get rid of checks. We had a concept of checkbooks. Government wouldn't let them get rid of checks, right? So now you've got the same situation where contactless payments, and the use of cash in the system has gone down, but the elderly effectively want to still pay in cash. So obviously the government doesn't want to allow, doesn't want to go to a world where you effectively got 100% digital. So although from different generations we think it's great, it's not really going to happen from a social point of view. But then get back to that utility really. If you had effectively 5G, a really good network, and it had coverage, across all your geography, and everyone effectively had smartphones, at a base level, e-wallets off your phones, and with a really good UX, it could be something that anyone could use, even the elderly. So this is the thing about the base infrastructure. I mean, this is what you're fighting about in some respects with digitalization and blockchain, because you've essentially got your networks that all overlap with each other. You have to have that core infrastructure before we can talk about a future world where everyone effectively everything's tokenized and everything's digitalized.
Not to pick on Iain, but I just want to kind of throw in a general kind of counterpoint to some details there. I think overall I completely agree, and I think Iain's agreeing with what I'm saying also. I think those of us kind of in the leading edge like to do things like, oh, well, when we have 5G and everybody has 5G and we all have smartphones type of thing. I think we like to kind of talk about the next thing a lot. We don't talk about what we have now, what can we deliver. So that's, I think it's unfortunate, because I think the people who are left out just end up being more left out, I guess. So that's something I think we do need to be a little bit careful about.
Yeah, even rural internet is not ubiquitous. Even in a first world country like Canada, we have terrible spotty internet coverage. So that's a very, very good point.
Yeah. I'm in LA, and I'm worried that this podcast, I might get dropped off of the internet, which should not be a concern I should have living in LA with kind of pretty, latest equipment and so forth. It's not even a hardware issue. I mean, if the cable company glitches somewhere in the server, I get dropped off, right? And I shouldn't have to worry about that at this day and age for a 1 hour recording, but I am. So
Yeah, but look, from the connectivity on the connectivity side, I see a big hurdle here. Well, for CBDCs, talking to central banks, and we do from time to time. The most of them actually they want this offline feature of physical cash to be transferred somehow into digital currency, but they actually they have basically no clue how the blockchain infrastructure, decentralized blockchain infrastructure works, and of course I don't say it's impossible, because from mathematical side, from cryptography. It might be possible to do this feature, the offline transactions, but at some costs actually, and we need to find the middle ground here, so some between the features and the technological issues we need to overcome.
I'll be the controversial guy again. I guess I'll go around and pick on everybody's comment.
No, it's fine.
I think the government is telling you this is what they need. The fact that it is or is not compatible with technology, I hate to say, is not their problem. I mean, if I were them, I would say, you tell me when you get it working, otherwise I'm not adopting your system, right? The answer should not be bent towards the technology. The technology should be bent towards the answer, right? So I would not say that it's their lack of understanding. It's more they're telling you what they need, and I would kind of be on their side on that argument.
Yeah, but I agree. Basically, I'm not saying it's not possible. It is.
Sure, I'm just saying, trying to keep it lively.
I'm gonna jump ahead then to regulation, which we have to talk about anyway, going on our topic of governments here. Regulation within the blockchain space can sometimes be referred to as a double-edged sword. So what do each of you think about that? And is regulation stifling creativity and stifling development? Or is it bringing increased legitimacy to our nascent industry?
Yeah, so this is a great question to me, but to me, it really depends which schools of thought you are following, so to speak. I mean, whether you are a believer of a decentralized or a centralized network or both. Blockchain purists will think that this flies directly in the face of their philosophy, because blockchains impose, the shifting of trust to technology, and these private actors who design and implement and mediate and govern that technology. So, but however, most time in practice, the promise of such distributed and decentralized system is not entirely true in practice. So as for me, I'm in the regulated digital security space, and therefore believe that players in the ecosystem have to be regulated to ensure our protection. So, however, I feel that regulators need to strike a very fine balance when drafting such blockchain legislation. So, governments shouldn't over-regulate, because this will stifle development, such as, for example, outright banning of transacting with and holding cryptocurrencies in countries like Vietnam or Cambodia, while under-regulation will create legal uncertainty and not enough clarity, which ultimately, I think it harms its progress. Just like, I think the recent case of Ripple, the San Francisco-based Ripple, where they are threatening to move out of the US as the authorities remain divided on whether to treat cryptocurrencies as commodity, currency, property, or security. So in my opinion, blockchain must be regulated in such a way that accounts for the associated risks it produces, but while simultaneously fostering the development of the technology and the acceptance of the community.
Look, if I may, actually, what I want to say, it's not the blockchain that needs to be regulated. It's the use cases, the implementation needs to be regulated. If we use blockchain for asset management, so the system itself, the technical solution should comply with the regulations in the asset management. If we use this for let's say intellectual property management. If there are regulations, we need to comply with those. Basically, we as a technology movers or technology providers, let's say, we need to understand the true purpose of the requirements of government regulations, and the principles are quite basic. There's like unprofessional consumer protection, which is fair, or fraud protection, which is fair, anti-money laundering, which is sometimes over regulated, but still irregular use, irregular case handling, like death or we need inheritance, court orders, etc. And this needs to be done. It doesn't matter from the regulator's perspective. How will you do this? That's probably Ben would agree. You just need to do this, need to implement this. It's and it comes from our talks with our Lithuanian regulators. They tell blockchain is okay. That's the technology. Crypto technologies, all crypto technologies are good. We use public key infrastructure. We use electronic signatures, all other infrastructures. And when you will manage to comply with the regulations in asset management, welcome. You are welcome. Nobody gives you a ban just for implementing something on the blockchain, let's say, or consortium chain. So I think we need to understand and comply.
Yeah, I mean, I've always worked in a regulated space, so for me, you know, it's completely normal to be regulated. I mean, what I mean by that, for example, you know, if I've been running a trading desk, you know, you're not allowed to settle your own trades. You know, there's a clear reason why we weren't allowed to do that, because there's an aspect of fraud or hiding positions and movements. That's basic financial regulation that was stipulated on banks. I've been an asset manager. You know, you had to have a custodian, a third-party custodian who held all those assets. So, you know, there's, you know, all of these regulations are put in for a really good reason. And actually about protection, you know, protection of investors and protection of consumers in a way. It's a highly regulated space, the financial industry. It's central to, you know, most people's welfare. You know, we had a situation in the financial crash where a bank nearly brought the whole system down. So, you know, I don't think there's any situation where, you know, we're not going to be operating in a regulated structure in terms of, because it's financial technology. I mean, there's other use cases for blockchain clearly, but the primary use cases, you know, which people are focused on, touch on the financial field. So, you know, you need to look very carefully in how the guidance from regulators. You need to work with them, consultations. You need to go through sandboxes, and you just need to think very carefully. Actually, you know, it's new, edgy technology, but a lot of the business models that people are applying are actually, you know, historical business models. So they're not actually new. And then you need to look very carefully how those use cases are regulated, and think quite carefully how you're implementing the technology. So anyway, overall, I think it's positive regulation. It gives you a framework to work with.
Hey, Bader.
Yeah, and kind of building off of that, I think that's what's most important here is it gives you a framework to build off of. Because otherwise it's just going to be a wild, wild west, and, you know, we're talking about using regulation to get mainstream adoption. To do that, we need to gain the trust of the public and, of course, also governing bodies. So regulation is kind of key to this, you know, to asset tokenization and distributed ledgers in general. Because, you know, unless we live in an anarchist world, completely decentralized currencies aren't going to, you know, be feasible forever.
Okay, Ben, do you have any insights on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what everybody is saying. I think it's hard to argue for less regulation. I think the only thing I would say is that the regulators have a responsibility also to keep up with what is going on. I think that is a tough part that regulators are not, they are not I mean, incentivize is not the right word because it's government, not a business, but they're not really coming up the curve as well as they can. I mean, I run a nonprofit co-founded here in LA that we work with the city and the state, the county government of Los Angeles, and it's very hard for them to keep them educated and keep them up to speed. I have a difficult time keeping up to speed in the crypto world, and for them, I mean, that's just a very small part of their total job. They've got fires to fight and so forth. So I think that's where the tough part is, where the rubber meets the road, and the lack of understanding sometimes leads towards some of the rules that don't make sense from a technology perspective, rules that don't make sense from even a finance perspective sometimes. So some of those things hopefully will get equalized over the long term, but in the short term, you will have certain pockets of, I think, over-regulation and certain pockets of under-regulation. And I think, keeping the government informed and communicating is key to that.
Okay, thank you. It's refreshing in a way to see that everyone is somewhat pro-regulation, because as you said, Beta, it's a bit of the Wild West out there sometimes, and it's hard to explain to some people who've been around for a while that regulation is the way that we will get mainstream adoption, and it's imperative.
Right. Yeah, it's all about striking, I think, a good balance between over and under regulating the entire space in general, because it just covers so many use cases. As was mentioned previously, that you need to kind of adjust it specific to the use case rather than just overall regulations just on the technology itself.
Yeah, but still, there are some regulations, some requirements that are already outdated, and some are not relevant in digital age, in digital world, or digital first products. So one of our missions is to sort of educate probably regulators. That's what we do.
And if I may just add that, Thailand, I think 2 days ago, has just revised its digital assets regulations. And previously it's, if you want to go into that space, you have to set up a digital asset exchange. But now they are actually encouraging digital asset custodians or that independent digital asset custodians can apply for a license, actually. So, yeah. And that just happened 2 days ago. So
yeah, they had to
right with us that
Yeah, you're right.
Instantly revise the regulation.
That's great, Iain. If you guys are heading towards that way, let us know. Happy to work on things there. So, not to stir the pot too much. I think just looking at to a certain extent the background of people on the panel. And just kind of my experience talking to people, I think the people that come from a more traditional finance background are a little more comfortable with the regulatory side. I think there's a history of working with that and kind of within that framework. Whereas I think from the tech side, it's actually, there's also a little bit of an education in the other direction to get the tech people to understand that the regulations are there for historical reasons, because people keep blowing the financial system up with things that they don't do, and these are there for consumer protection, for investor protection, for and so forth. So there are two sides of that coin. There's also an education in the other direction. So I want to be fair to the regulatory side also.
Yep, that's perfect. Okay, we're gonna switch tracks again, and I'd like to ask everyone here. We're here to talk about Symbol. So what is Symbol's potential for asset tokenization, and what does Symbol bring to the table that other blockchains lack?
Because, we have just started to work with NEM on this Symbol project. So, I'm not the CTO, I'm not a technical guy, but what I understand from this partnership is that, Symbol provides this asset tokenization features out of the box in the protocol itself. So it is evident from Symbol's design that it is targeting tokenization use cases. So, and it has this mosaics, which are representations of asset-backed tokens. And these mosaics actually include attributes such as supply and divisibility, which are necessary for tokenization. So, and not only that, there is this sophisticated layer of controls on mosaics that allows owners to set fine-grained controls on transfers and the recipients involved. So, to me, this gives the projects the freedom to actually structure the offering in their own terms. So, and in addition, since these are part of actually the protocol, the best part is they come for free. So with guarantees on security and stability. So whereas for other blockchains, these features are not included within the protocol. And therefore, projects have to write the smart contracts themselves or even buy them. So this adds to additional costs and executional risks. So as well, the tokenization landscape evolves, we can expect Symbol, hopefully, to add more features to cater for new use cases. So, and this will make Symbol more affordable to issue tokens over the long run and become a natural choice for tokenization.
Yeah, but besides what Iain mentioned, I would add metadata and restrictions as very needed core features just to implement the irregular case handling. But basically the most important thing is finalization. And as we all know, there are only very few blockchain protocols that they have finalization in place, and that is probably the easiest part to explain to regular securities regulator that look, we have this finalization thing inside the chain, in the core level, in the first layer, and it works actually. And the other important thing is multi-sig, the core functionality. Playing with this, we can achieve a lot of business logic.
Okay, Peter.
Yeah, so definitely Symbol brings a lot to the table, I think, that is lacking. I mean, mostly, right now they just discussed already built-in features, but the cool part is you can actually expand on those features and build your own, which tie perfectly into another point, which are hybrid chain models. So you essentially have private and public chains next to each other operating, where the private chains can have all sorts of interesting features and plugins and extensions, and then later reconcile, for very, in terms of fees, for very little to the public chain, which really, in terms of scalability, is a huge, huge deal. Because eventually, if this is going to be used worldwide, we're going to need that scalability, which is something that previously chains like Ethereum have actually had trouble with their networks getting congested with everything being on one main chain.
Hey, Ben, do you have any insights there?
Yeah, I don't come from the technical side, so I probably have a lot less to add on this conversation. From my perspective, NEM has been around for a while, so it really is an evolutionary thing, and having that history and that track record, I think, was something that we were very comfortable about.
Look, I mean, these guys have done a great sales job.
I know, it's great.
So, but then look, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, obviously, because I've been around a long time, and I've before launch, and I've seen the features there, and I've seen the way the architecture has been constructed. I just think it's really refreshing to see projects that are actually building real use cases. And certainly, if you follow those projects, which I have actually on the Slack groups, you can see how really they've used some of our core features in the protocol to get around problems specifically around some of these regulatory. So how do you address regulatory compliance for the blockchain? And really, it's by using some of our blockchain primitives or features that are built in the core protocol is allowing you to do that. And the great thing about Symbol really is that when we launch Symbol, well, the private chain's launched, but the public chain launches quite soon. When we launch it, it's not finished. There's already a tech roadmap for 2021. And what you'll see is, in terms of brand tokenization, about 50% of the roadmap will be building out more features and make the system more flexible, give more use cases, and actually keep abreast of how fast this industry is moving. Because we're moving towards some sort of interoperability and standardization. And I think that's the big thing. If you look at it from a user's point of view, you want a token where you can just, subject to being allowed to transfer the token, where you can just move it around, buy, sell it. You should be completely agnostic to all the networks. And really, that only works with interoperability and some standardization. And I think at some point that's where we're going to, and that's really important that Symbol keeps on top of how the industry evolves.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm going to move now to some individual questions, kind of like a rapid fire round. So just 2 questions each. Keep them short, just so we can get through them all here, and everyone gets to share their views. So, Iain from NEM Group, Sorry, not you, Iain Fong, not yet. I've got two questions for you. And the first one is, in your opinion, what are the top 3 challenges of the regulatory space in blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one is the concept of identity, really, because, you know, we're getting used in the traditional blockchain world from cryptocurrencies is this, you know, there's an anonymity. When you're moving towards a regulatory space, it's there's no concept is about ID really. It's ID, KYC, AML. It's how do you link that with the physical accounts? So I think that's the first one. I think also the other, from the background, again, from cryptocurrencies, is the concept of a bearer instrument. Bearer instruments don't really sit very well in a regulated space. You know, really, you know, it's an approved, you know, in terms of central depositories, an approved holder rather than a bearer holder. And then just really around the interoperability and scalability, you know, regulators are, you know, to get really comfortable, they've got to see that these networks aren't going to go down, that they've got some sort of lifespan. They've been up for, you know, 5 years or X like NEM has. It gives people more confidence that, you know, you can handle a huge amount of transactions, you know, because there's a lot of value, secure value on a chain. You've really got to think, okay, the size of that value has got to be secure. You've got to be able to transfer it. The funds can't get lost. So that's where I'd see the big challenges.
Okay. And the second question is, you've kind of already answered this, but just if you have any more views on regulation, and if you view it as a help or hindrance to the success of Symbol.
Yeah, I think the architecture of Symbol, it's you know, it's built with the ability to customize, and you'll get more plugins. It's a plugin architecture. So really, you know, as the regulation evolves, and the requirements resolve, you know, and the standardization is definitely going to evolve with the industry. You know, we'll be able to build that into the core protocol. So from Symbol's point of view, it's flexible enough, and this is a plugin type architecture, so it's fine, really.
Okay, thank you. And then Vytautas, we're moving to you next. Could you give us a use case that SuperHow has worked on with regards to asset tokenization, and what excites you about this area?
Yeah, I have a couple of exciting projects. One, of course, is Bank of Lithuania's digital collector's coin, which is basically we created the hybrid infrastructure. That's thanks to Symbol architecture. It was possible. So where we introduced the new type of asset, digital collectibles coin, digital collectible certificate that sort of can be collected, exchanged, then converted into a physical asset, all the nice life cycle. But basically this shows to general public what lies ahead, and they can now touch the future today via one or another interface. Of course, everything is not perfect yet, but we are moving towards this. And the other very important and interesting case is depository center. Basically the different approach to accounting the securities, what central security depositories does, where today we have the totally fragmented market here, where each country has one or more security depositories doing the accounting in centralized databases, where we head towards giving market the consortium chain, also the hybrid approach, the consortium chain, where several central security depositories can account their own assets, because what Symbol protocol allows us to do to assign each market participant its golden share, to account their own isolated those tokens or assets. But the thing is that we need to move into accepting digital originals, shares as digital originals, not the substitutes, not nothing, but we need to fully move. And it's from the regulatory perspective, it's possible, it's doable, and we will do this.
Okay, and the second question is what are the most challenging aspects of the regulatory space for your blockchain projects?
Actually, I mentioned already those. We need to understand the true purpose of regulation, and we need to agree with the regulators that these features or means of or these technical side that it meets the regulation. Well, this part, and of course the sort of strange out of date things as offline transactions, but everything is doable.
Thank you. Iain, Fong, I'm going to you next. So current regulation has robust customer protections, baked into secure assets to prevent fraud and reverse mistakes. So how did you navigate the requirement for some sort of controller function on Symbol?
I think this is a good question, but I'm not a technical guy. I'm a marketer. It's very good for Zan, which is my CTO, and he's not around.
Yeah, sorry.
As far as I know, I think how Propine retains the control on the accounts through structuring them as multi-signature accounts. So, and this will allow Propine to control the majority of the owners. So in cases of fraud or faulty transactions, I think Propine will be able to provide the recovery function where the transactions can be reversed. And also, all the private keys are secured on FIPS-compliant computing devices. I tried.
No, that's great. That's great. So as Propine is in the MAS's regulatory sandbox, how do you think this positions you and Symbol in the marketplace?
I think, well, it positions us very well. It positions us to be trusted, reliable, but maybe a little bit of history. I mean, like security tokens in Singapore, it used to be, they are regulated through a full scope of security regulations, okay? Hence, many of the advantages of this asset class will be significantly reduced if the infrastructure providing these services is not regulated and compliant. Besides, there has been considerable uncertainty in the past as to how a particular security token should be considered within the law. So I think addressing these concerns involves a few players, such as the governments, the central banks, and private companies, of course. So, and especially in Singapore, when Propine received our, the traditional CMS custody license, which is the, and our acceptance into MAS FinTech Sandbox program a year ago, I think these are very clear signs that the traditional market infrastructure is adapting to the token economy. So, I mean, this was great news to Propine, but I think more importantly, this has served almost to move the whole industry forward. And it places Singapore at the forefront of innovation in technology, but at the same time, its regulatory framework as well. So I'm sure you know that MAS sets a very high standard in accepting companies in their fintech sandboxes, and only through truly innovative and sound companies are accepted. So, and consequently, both Propine and Symbol can experience an almost virtuous knock-on effect of increased credibility and reliability, which certainly stands out among other service providers. So, and this also, I'd like to add that it has enabled several hesitant but eager institutions that have been waiting on the sidelines to initiate the participation in the digital securities. And what we have noticed is somewhat a distinctly warm reception from both the traditional and the new capital market players owing to our license, which has helped us forge many partnerships with them. So, and without regulation, a technology service provider will only take care of the technology innovation, but leaves the regulatory and legal burden on their clients to bear and to clear. So Propine's distinction is having the ability to create a solution that removes the most vital risks, which are both the regulations and the technology, and thus building a bedrock on which the foundations of the security token ecosystem will be cemented.
Thanks so much. Ben, we're going to move to you. Could you please outline the regulatory state of blockchain in the United States?
Sure, it'll take a few hours, but I think people are surprised when I say this. The U.S. regulatory environment is actually relatively mature for security tokens. I think the crypto maximalists would probably disagree with me on this, but following kind of the more traditional, security laws, it actually has been doable for a while. A number of projects have been tokenized. They've been listed on exchanges. They've been trading. So, from a security token market perspective, it's actually relatively advanced and relatively mature. Specifically to our whiskey product, because the whiskey itself is in the US, there was no discussion of us trying to set up something offshore and do everything offshore. We're onshore, IRS is going to get their pound of flesh and all that. We've bit the bullet on that. So we've created actually an onshore Delaware entity for investors to come in. We have an offshore feeder for non-US investors, but everything feeds into the master fund in the US. We're offering that under a Reg D exemption to accredited investors in the US and a Reg S exemption for international investors. We're following the 1-year lockup, so we'll be issuing tokens after the 1-year lockup, and people will be able to trade that. We have active discussions with security token exchanges, both US and internationally, that are licensed to do this. And they're all very interested in listing a whiskey token because it sounds cool, if nothing else. And people want to, have an interesting asset on their platform. Previously, quite a number of different VC funds have already tokenized. There's a debate as to what they're trading. The NAV isn't as clear, but I think the whiskey angle should be, very interesting for investors to look at. Our understanding of the regulation also is that after the 1-year lockup, the tokens would be available for trading to non-accredited investors also. So over the longer time frame, we are going to see this proliferation and better access in the US. And internationally, it's already not regulated by the US. And each local jurisdiction would have their own regulations. For example, our fund is registered in Singapore for private placement to qualified investors. Those regulations are slightly different from the accredited investors in the US, but they're clear. And we have distributors in Singapore that is out walking around with our products legally and showing that to clients, just like we have distributors in the US with broker-dealer licenses that are showing that in the US. So, from my perspective, being in kind of traditional finance for 2 decades now, the regulations are relatively clear. It is much more restricting than what I think a crypto maximalist would like to think. From their perspective, it may not make sense, but has been around for a while, and we are following that, and I think we're compliant, with everything.
Okay, and what do you see as the next breakout in North America for digital assets?
I'm seeing a lot more kind of hard asset tokenization projects. We've been working on our whiskey fund for over a year. We were able to secure, production capacity, which is rare, and we're pushing into that. The angle we're taking is actually more as a commodity, less as a collectibles. So, our product is going on, into bottles that are going on the shelves at the local liquor store. This is not designed to be, collectibles or the collectors would value a fancy brand, FOMO and all that. That is not the angle we're going after. So I'm certainly not saying we're going to get away from supply and demand, but it's supply and demand of mass consumption of whiskey, not collectibles. I do see that there is an interest in the collectible space, in the US, and I think that's the direction where a lot of people are going. And I think that that's an interesting angle. From a non-US perspective, I know your question is more US, but from a non-US perspective, I'm seeing a lot of interest on the real estate side. And I think, that's something I'm keeping an eye on. I think US investors are, spoiled for choice for real estate investment. So there's not a need or a big urgent drive towards tokenization. But I think for, parts of Asia, parts of Europe, and more Asia probably, that real estate is actually a very important topic to all the investors and an interesting one that, tokenization brings maybe a little more value to than in the US, where you can pretty much buy a REIT on everything. Everybody and their relatives or somebody they know and their acquaintances are in the real estate space. They have investment groups. They have all sorts of things. So I think the access just is much better in the US, and hence the lack of demand for just having things in tokenized formats.
Okay, thank you. Bader, we're moving to you. And I've got 2 questions. So from a technical standpoint, what are the pros and cons of digital assets?
Right. So as far as pros goes, really, of course, we all know that there are tons of pros to this. All of it usually goes back to the core values of a distributed ledger, which is the transparency and the security that it provides, as well as in the background, you can cryptographically prove, through cryptography that you own an asset. And especially through features like symbols finalization, that once you own something, you own something. It's not going away anytime soon. No one's able to take it away from you. Um, but part of that decentralization is kind of a double-edged sword, because while you have control of your assets, this goes more into the cons, you have control of your assets, meaning if you're irresponsible with your keys, you have the potential of losing your assets very, very easily. So this is something that definitely needs to be handled, especially as we go more into mainstream adoption. And something a little more that maybe not many people think about is, as Ben was saying, many people talking about tokenizing, hard assets, physical assets. Most of the time you have media associated with that, pictures, videos, documents. You're not going to store those on the blockchain. That's not what the blockchain is used for. So storage could become also a major concern there, as far as digital asset tokenization.
Okay, thank you. And what would be the biggest hurdle from a technical side to mainstream adoption?
Probably maintaining, scalability, like the right balance of private and public chains, what data to record, what data not to show, that ensures security for everyone. And also, financial information is at its core a very private thing. So having that right combination of private, chain action going on while reconciling to the public, there needs to be a delicate balance there. That's probably would be the biggest hurdle, would be scalability.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I have one question from Iain to Vytautas, and then we'll open it up to a short Q&A amongst yourselves. And Vytautas, we've gotten used to the concept of blockchain being an immutable ledger with private keys, holding ownership of an asset. How can tokenization on Symbol navigate the current regulatory requirements respect to centralized security depository and ownership records?
Yeah, basically, we were thinking on the architecture, how this could be done. I think that there will be additional, let's say, expansion through the plugins to the core network itself. Just you need to write some more additional types of transactions, but the in the center of everything lies the multi-level, multi-signature part where you basically you would allow one entity to do some additional activities with their own issued assets. Basically, it's when you try to draw the picture, it becomes more or less understandable, though it's quite hard to explain in words. But it's a multi-level, multi-signature part.
Okay, that's great. We just have time for one question from each of you, whoever wants to ask one of the other panelists the question. So who would like to do that?
Yeah, I'm quite to ask Ben a question, actually, about the whiskey fund. So, I mean, how would you pitch the whiskey fund actually as a real investment case, not just a flashy thing to do on blockchain? How would you actually pitch that as an investment?
Sure. Actually, I'm glad you asked this. We actually pitch our fund actually as an investment. It's less about the fact that it's whiskey. We're not delivering bottles to clients. There's no tasting or anything of that nature. It's really an investment instrument. We see that we can get into buying whiskey at high volumes, and this is part of the whole fractionalization discussion. We're able to go to a distiller and buy high volumes, where we're able to achieve a good price. And from there, we're able to hold the barrels for 5 years, and the assets increase 3 to 5 times over that frame. Including our fees and everything, we calculated out, we're targeting a net IRR over 20% per annum for the investor. So it's quite an attractive asset. And the biggest thing I actually talk about with investors is the fact that it's a very stable asset in terms of gains and value. like I said before, this is not a collectible. I'm not waiting for collectors to kind of drive the price up. This is really the price of whiskey that's sitting on the shelf right now. We go back that number back to that 3 to 5x. And during that 5 years, we're covered on market value by insurance and so forth. So, for the lack of a better way of saying it, it's very hard for me to mess it up just with whiskey sitting on the shelf. So, that value is being generated despite my efforts. So, from that perspective, it really is an interesting, investment instrument. And we like to provide that, on a blockchain for people to look at, to trade. Kind of one more kind of side angle while we're talking about this. I used to run commodities for Bank of America Merrill Lynch across Asia. So I see this really as a development of a commodities market rather than a collector's market. We have the producers of the whiskey, we have the investors. And in theory, the people that would buy the whiskeys, let's say the other distillers and the international buyers, they can also come and buy these tokens as a hedge for their future, needs from a barrel perspective. So we basically have producers, users, and investors. And with tokenization, with listing it on a security token exchange, we also have a place to exchange. That forms a complete, commodities market for, our product.
So basically, it's commodity-based stablecoin.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, we are not.
Sounds great.
Yeah, we're not linking the tokens specifically to each individual barrel because I think that's difficult. I sell barrel A and the owner of barrel B says, "Hey, why didn't I get my money back?" It just gets difficult there. So what we're doing is we're doing fractional ownership over a portfolio of the whiskey. So everybody is fractionally, converted to cash as I sell these barrels. And just to give you a sense of scale, the first order I've put in, we bought 1,000 barrels of whiskey with kind of a $1 million AUM. And as we collect more money, we're going to buy more whiskeys. And, 1,000 barrels, pours out to, 200,000 to, 250,000 bottles of whiskey. So we've got a lot of whiskey available.
A lot. A lot of whiskey.
Just to put things in perspective, yes. That's what you get for $1 million worth of whiskey, yes.
Just curious, Ben, did you taste the whiskey? I'm sure it tastes very good.
So I've tasted the finished product. I've actually been shipped samples of the freshly made whiskey to us for that first 1,000 barrels. I've gotten samples. I have not tasted those. They have not been aged. It's clear. It's very high alcohol content. It's not what people drink. It's what they call kind of what they call the white dog, which is the pre-aging stuff. Not for enjoyment. I have the samples from a manager of the fund perspective, not from I have some with free whiskey type of discussion. It's not that.
Okay, thanks Ben. Thanks everyone. Unfortunately, I have to wrap it up there. We're out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists, Vytautas, Iain, Ben, and Bader. Thank you so much for joining us for our second webinar on asset tokenization. And I think we've done really well here. We've covered a lot of topics. So, and I thank you for your insight and for your wisdom. Thanks so much.
Great,
Thank you, Laura.